For those who don't know me, my name is Ezekiel, go by Zekrom Emotes online, and I've been playing competitive Pokemon for almost a decade now. Even with COVID canceling the official circuit, I've been able to spend a lot of my free time during this past year or so, still finding plenty of opportunities to play this game, with a huge part of that being draft leagues. With how involved I've been in these types of tournaments during this COVID era, I wanted to make this video going over my experiences. Think about all those war stories people would write into their team reports back when live events were a thing, just now in video form. As I expect this to be a very long video, do check the description timecodes if there's a specific section you'd like to skip to. If you're familiar with draft leagues in the context of Pokemon, you may be thinking of drafting Pokemon themselves. You make a team out of them on a week-by-week basis. No, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. Instead, these draft leagues draft players. Think of it as a sports league where the more notable players have a better shot at being drafted, and once you're on a team, you compete versus the other teams to have a chance at playoffs and win the season. These types of team tournaments have been a part of VGC for a long time now, most notably NPA, but it wasn't until last year I was given my first opportunity to play one of these types of leagues. Unbeknownst to me, it would snowball from competing in one league to another. Across the 8 teams I was a part of, I played 41 matches, and not every one of those will be covered for the sake of time. If I have something interesting to point out or talk about, I'll go over it, otherwise it's going to be skipped. Same with the leagues, I won't be skipping any, but some I'll have more to say about than others. For some clarity, I'll be covering these in order in which they finish for me, as the timeline gets a bit muddy towards the end when I have 3 leagues going on at once. Since I'm not too sure who will end up watching this, and team tournaments aren't something everyone is familiar with, I will be covering some of what goes into competing in one throughout the video. If you have any questions, ask in the comments, and I'll be able to answer them. With that said, just where does this story start? For most draft leagues out there, being able to compete in one is knowing the right people and or being a well-known name. VGC can be very cliquey, and unless you make a good impression on any team tryouts or interest forms, if you don't know anyone, chances are you're going to be overlooked if you don't have the accomplishments to your name. The bar of entry can be a bit high for newcomers, so my best advice is to find either a league geared towards beginners or to try to find your way as a team cheerleader where you can interact with notable players as a helper. Making connections is a part of life, and VGC is no different in that regard. Before Wacko World Tour 2, despite having played a long time, I wasn't really a known player outside of Texas locals, and thus when I tried signing up for NPA in previous years, I wouldn't get drafted. Even with Wacko World Tour being somewhat of a joke league, I'd say it has a similar bar of entry to something like NPA, and those managing are going to draft the people they know. Lucky for me, I knew someone who would be a manager this time around, which was a chance to get my foot in the door. This brings me to my friend Jakob, who will be managing the Eterna City Eimis. Named after, well, if you're of age you can look her up. But point is, Jakob knew of me, and this allowed me to experience my first team tournament. I wasn't really playing the format at the time, that being Series 5. To be honest, I think I'm one of the few people who doesn't like that format as far as Dynamax formats go. But since Wacko World Tour featured a variety of past and unconventional formats, I had a chance to enjoy myself playing Pokemon and meeting new people at the same time. That's a major part about being able to compete in these tournaments, and that's the ability to play and interact with players you otherwise might not have been able to. It's great for practice and learning, but also for the potential new friendships. It sounds corny saying that, I know, but it really does become a part of wanting to come back and play in these team tournaments. Having good vibes and enjoying yourself being a part of the team becomes just as important as winning. For this first time, I'll be honest in saying I was a bit intimidated being on a team, as I wanted to make a good impression on these strong players. I wanted to prove I could be just as good and worthy of being their teammate. Proving myself has always been a big thing for me with this game, and this was one of those moments I really felt that pressure. This anxiety of being within a team would go away over time, especially as I added more results to my name. But even within this time span on being on the Emmys, I would worry less about that due to how well everyone got along with the team. Despite not really knowing anyone outside my 2 fellow Texas teammates at first, I had a great time chatting the server, getting to know these people, and experiencing this team environment, which was quite different from anything I had been a part of up until then. I had always been a lone wolf when it came to practicing the game, mostly due to lack of connections at the time, so seeing all this collaboration was something very new to me, as surprising as that may sound. This is all considering I would end up with a poor performance of 1-4, quite the opposite of the strong impression I wanted. The first match I want to go over here is the third one versus Eimis, due to how nervous I was feeling before playing. At the time, we were the #1 team in the league, and we were on the verge of getting our second loss. While this wouldn't hurt our chances at playoffs all that much at the time, because everyone was so invested into the team and our success, we didn't want to take that L. A thing about these tournaments are the nerves and pressure you may feel before playing your match. Being nervous about a match isn't anything new to competitive Pokemon, but I feel there's something different about it in these tournaments when you have the entire team relying on you to win. If you lose in a standard Swiss tour, only you are set back with that result. In a team tour, your loss can potentially set the whole team back. This is even worse when you're the last one to play, where your result determines the final score for the week, and thus all the pressure is now on you. While scheduling last gives you the most amount of prep time, it potentially puts you in the position of being that final week decider. For the 2 matches left, those were in playoffs, and since I was one of the few people playing, let alone enjoying Series 6 on the team, thanks in part due to me performing well in the Fall Scramble, I was put in for the current format slot. Despite my comfort with that team, which, by the way, I did make a team report for on this channel, I would lose both matches. Had I hit Boltbeak Game 1 versus Aro Rayquaza and his Max Primarina, and assuming Game 2 played out the same, then I would have picked up the win there. Even so, I choked the Game 3 endgame, so that was on me to be better about outcomes I could control and not just blame the loss on poor luck. While my match could have gone better, Jakob likes to point out had a certain then recently crowned Players Cup champion on our team seen his guaranteed win con for his match, we would have had a spot in the finals. Alas, the Emmys run ended in top 4. It was disappointing, sure, but in our first season as a team, we had made playoffs, had the season MVP, and even had Santi with us as he won the first Players Cup. We didn't really play a part in that, but it's still cool, you know. Overall, this was a great introduction into what team tours can be. Following the end of the season here, I get the only break between all these leagues, as the next one is only in the planning stages at the time. Something I find interesting about what led me to manage my own team is it ties back to this. At the time, I was at this server called TPL, or the Pokemon League, not really a creative name, but it was home to several rising VGC players and some established faces as the server got heavily promoted, namely in Mount Silver and the Pokemon Sword and Shield subreddit Discord. I wasn't active in it all that much at first, but clearly my name got around as I got a DM one night from this guy named Swilley saying how he saw I was in the top cut for a scramble and if I would be interested in managing for a league he was developing. Had I not been destroyed by Roxanne's Players Cup 1 team when streaming one day, which in turn led me to make my own Baron on it for Series 6, which I ended up having a lot of success with, I may not have been given this opportunity to manage what I would name the Houston Fusion Bolts. Compared to just playing for a team, managing is a whole different game, as at least for me, there was an immediate difference in the amount of work I was going to put in to help everyone else out. While being on the Emmys, I would try to help my teammates prep when I could. I wouldn't always be in every chat giving my own input, but now managing the Bolts, I felt that extra push to always give some feedback when no one else would, or go out of my way to run through matchups. Especially for this first season, those on the team would know just how much work I put in to ensure our team's success. To add to this, TPL was a league where those managing could also play, and with me being one of the stronger players on our team, I had the additional task of being a regular player. I do want to note that for some leagues, managers aren't allowed to play, while in others you can draft yourself as a player for a set price. This is one of those things which can vary league by league, with this one the main captain being a free player and a co-captain being a 5k pick, something which will be raised to 15k for the following season. In retrospect, on paper we were one of the weaker teams, but we made it up in the insane team spirit we had. Heading into midseason, we were the number 1 team, having won 4 out of the 5 weeks. While post midseason we had a significantly weaker record, winning only 1 week out of the 4, and just narrowly for that matter, we maintained those good vibes we had established from the beginning. It helped that a lot of us already knew each other from another Discord, so that energy we had over there was transferred over to the Bots Discord as well. And for those outside of that group, it didn't take much to build that good chemistry, leading to an extremely positive and motivated atmosphere. If people are chatty and show interest in being there, the good vibes go a long way to motivate everyone and keep spirits high. Everyone will be working together, practicing matchups, team building, and being just as active while we're just hanging out in there. It's for all these reasons why my time with the first season of the Bolts is still so far my best team tour experience to date, as it was the perfect storm for that team environment you want. The only thing which could have made it better is if we had won the season, but we came close, ultimately snagging 3rd place after being knocked out of top 4 and winning the 3rd place face-off. Now for my own performance, I improved on my Waka World Tour results just a bit by going 4-5. Something notable is for my first 3 wins, I was the one who clinched us the win for the week, including a Game 7 for the first captain versus captain match and me versus Azulite. After my solid 3-0 start, I would go on a losing streak, which ran along our team's declining performance after midseason. As for notable matches here, my match versus Zordor would coincidentally fall the same week we had just faced off in finals of a tournament, a match you can watch on my channel along with the rest of that top cut. If we had wanted, we could have made that finals count for TPO as well, but we held off and instead played later that week. While my loss versus him in finals was a good match looking back, I will say I was extremely disappointed in how I played for our TPL match. I don't know what was going on with me, maybe because we were losing the week, but I played very poorly here, likely due to mounting pressure. All I need to say is, I max geysered into Dracovish, thinking it was part rock and that it would knock it out. To be clear, I knew full well at the time it was Water Dragon, except for that one moment. The other notable match here is me versus Azulite round 2. Upon my suggestion, we had a special 3rd place face-off happen at the same time as the finals went on. In poetic fashion, our final opponent was the team we faced week 1, and this being one last hurrah for our team, I played most of my bench players and had me play versus Alex again on the caveat we used our signature Pokemon. I wanted those who hadn't been able to play for us much, or at all, at least get this one last chance to play. We went 5-1 to clinch the bronze before my own match took place, the final match of TPO 1, as the finals had been played by then. Even with an auto-loss matchup for me, it was all for fun anyway, and thus the curtain closed on TPL Season 1, and really that server as a whole. After the league finished, to keep things short, the server went on a decline in activity, and thus the owner pulled a plug on it. But from the ashes of that server, the 2nd season of the TPL World Cup was born, in the form of PGL. I brought up NPA a few times already, without explaining just what it is. NPA, or the National Pokemon Association, again, a bit of a boring name in my opinion, has been the premier VGC draft league with many of the best players in the world having played in it at some point. It's considered the most prestigious of the team tournaments, although perhaps that sentiment has fallen off just a bit. Regardless, I had always wanted to play an NPA to prove my ability as a player and had signed up 2 or 3 times before but had never gotten in. If there was ever a year I would get drafted, I felt it was this one. And thanks to a vouch from Primitive, someone I had been able to meet before then, thanks to a chat born out of that TPO exodus. I was able to be drafted to the Goldenrod Rollouts as their last pick. The Rollouts has a history of drafting some of the more notable Texas players on their rosters before, so I was very happy to continue that legacy. Unfortunately, my time with the Rollouts has been the most lacking out of the Team Tour experiences I've had up to date. I don't want to be too negative, but it can't go without saying that this was the most inactive out of all the chats I've been in. I was excited to practice with all these high caliber players on the team, but with only a handful of us talking in the chat, that ambition fell off. Me still wearing my captain's hat from TPL, I did my best to scout out whatever information I could on our opponents and be as much as an asset I could be to the team. This will not take us far, as we finished the season as one of the lower seeds, which, while disheartening, wasn't as much of a blow as the general inactivity. I don't blame my teammates, as they would cite general disinterest in the format, or the game in general, something which wouldn't take much long for me to go through as well. I was at least able to make up for this by having one of the stronger finishes on our team, going 4-2. I started out 3-0 once again, with my 2 losses being extremely close matches despite the poor matchups I walked into. I could have potentially gone 5-2 or 4-3 had it been played week 6, which I was supposed to since I was 2-0 after all. But somehow my manager Caleb forgot to put me in for the week. I don't know how you forget something like that, but he did, and thus I couldn't play it versus the team I was most looking forward to playing, those being the Puppies, who would end up winning the season. For our final week, with both us and our opponents and the Islanders being out of playoff contention, several of us agreed to play non-standard formats, i.e. anything besides Series 9. I suggested we play Series 2 to my opponent, but to my excitement, he suggested we play an older format instead, to which we agreed upon VGC 15, which is my personal favorite format of all time. In a very silly set highlighting the major flaw to 15, I took the win, the only win for the Rollouts that week in fact, as I wouldn't realize until later, we have been nearly 8-0 had it not been for me. Not like it mattered, but not bad for an MPA rookie to get us one last win for a season, if I do say so myself. I don't have much else to say here besides, I do hope my next MPA experience is livelier, as I really missed out on that for this initial run. It's disappointing. The league I was most looking forward to playing in is one I have less to say about. I'm still glad to have been able to be part of the team and of something I had been working up to for several years. So now is where things get a little crazy, as I begin to have overlap with several leagues going on at the same time. As MPA hits the second half of regular season, my friends and I catch wind of this new draft league, which seemingly came out of nowhere by the name of the Evergrande League. We made use of EGL to keep us busy between this transition period of MPA and PGL, and as a scouting tool for potential players to draft onto our teams. I know for my own draft plans, EGL played a big part in influencing them, as it featured a lot of players I otherwise would have had little to no information on. With me still being busy with MPA, and to be honest, showing my first signs of burnout, I didn't involve myself too much while as a member of the Solgaleo Pride. I would show up and play my match. No prep, just knowing what team I would run for the week and hoping for the best. At the time, I was struggling to find a team for Series 9, so I would end up sticking with teams I was familiar with from Series 7, until my last week where I started using what would become my main Series 9 squad. Somehow, I went 4-0 doing this, most notably playing my matches versus my friends Umar and Tio on the same day, on the same stream, as both matches were featured while Slim was streaming his weekly EGL report. EGL had a bit of an odd structure, where each of the 6 teams would be split into 2 divisions, Sky and Spear. Sky was intended for the more experienced players, while Spear was meant towards the many lesser known players who participated in this. This wasn't set in stone, as players could move in or out based on their manager's discretion and on their own performance. I bring this up as I was part of the Sky Division for the Pride, who went 1-4 across the 5 weeks of regular season. Now, while my division faltered, the Spear Division made playoffs, going a more impressive 3-2. This is where I try to be more of an active presence as our team made its way into Grand Finals for the Spear Division. I could also afford to do so since at the time I wasn't being played in Wacko World Tour 3, and my commitments to NPA were long done by then. I must admit, I feel a bit bad I wasn't able to be more of a presence on the team, since I was the most experienced player there, and I imagine some of my teammates felt the same way about me as I did towards my teammates at NPA. Perhaps this is me projecting, but it's how I feel looking back, and I feel the need to say that. On a more positive note, I could tell everyone had a good time in there, and it was a great thing for many of them to experience for the first time what it's like to play in one of these tournaments. Everyone worked so hard, and I could see why at least our Spear Division was able to make it as far as they did. As much as I dislike some of the administrative decisions with that league, I think it's great to have it around for those who would otherwise have no shot in the more competitive leagues. So you did hear me correctly just a little while ago. I did say Wacko World Tour 3, as they had now been just under a year since the previous season. Once again, I was drafted onto the Eimis, now rebranded under the inferior name of the Amouranths, and just like last time, I come up with another poor performance going 0-3. I don't know what it is about Wacko World Tour and me being cursed playing in it. The one positive from this lineup was this amusing turn of events I posted on Twitter, but come the day of the match, I was already extremely down on myself after choking my final round of Swiss in a tournament I was playing in that day. Last thing I wanted to do was play more Pokemon, and my play in this match shows. To my surprise, 2 weeks later I get played again for the current format slot, now being Series 10. It seems I wasn't vocal enough to where Jakob would have known, but at the time I was not playing any Pokemon at all, as I gave myself a short vacation from playing the game. Following that last poor performance, I finally stepped away from doing tournaments all the time, especially since I had gotten that major tournament win I had always wanted the week prior. This will be the second of 2 big events in this timeline, which convinced me it was best for me to start playing less VGC. I couldn't step away for too long though, as at this time PGL was also underway, but at least for then, I wanted that break of not having to think about the current format. Because of my negativity towards the game at the time, to be honest, I was a bit mad of now having to deal with this match coming up. I considered bringing this up, but a part of me felt like it was wrong for me to say, please take me off just because I don't want to play. Perhaps it would have been best for me to say so, but in my head, it just felt like something I had to deal with for that week. I just stuck with it, and the match went about as well as I expected. I played it on my friend's PC in fact, and in playing, I just wanted to get it over with so I could enjoy my evening hanging out with friends. As fate would play out, I was able to redeem myself versus Kunal later down the line. For the rest of the team, I wouldn't be the only to disappoint. Unlike last time, we performed quite poorly, only winning a single week out of the 7. Perhaps because of this, the vibes we had last time, even with most of the original team returning, just weren't there. We had some good moments, namely in that one channel in the Discord, don't know what I'm referring to, but outside that, Wacko World Tour 3 simply came and went. Amidst PGL right on the horizon, a new team tour ran by the Smogon VGC people would crop up, that being the Smogon Premier League, or SPL. I wouldn't have signed up for it if it weren't for the distinction of it featuring past formats, those being VGC 17, 18, and Ultra. But sadly not 15, despite its vocal fanfare. It was like Wacko World Tour in that regard, or past World Cup iterations for that matter, but in a more serious league. 2018 is my second favorite VGC format, so I was excited to potentially play that in a competitive setting again. Since this league and PGL started at the same time, and my commitments to PGL took priority, I once again didn't involve myself all too much until I started playing myself, which wasn't until week 4. I likely would have been slotted to play earlier, considering my then recent Rose Tower win, but I was very explicit in asking to not be slotted, once again due to my frustration at the game. After shaking off a bit of that negativity and forcing myself to start playing Series 10, I will be slotted in for week 4, where I would propose, if I were to win my match, I get to play 18 for the following week. So how did that go? I got myself another perfect 4-0 performance in A-League, 3 of those matches being in 18. I would go in with my signature 18 squad for the first week, but following that and prepping for Pink Sylvie, I was expecting a Charizard Y counter team. Due to my sparring partner for the previous week now being on the opposing team, I didn't get any chance to practice with anything new, and I ended up taking the same 6 again. Once I saw the Charizard on team preview, I immediately thought, oh fuck, I caught it, I knew she would bring Charizard. Only for the thing to Mega Evolve into Charizard X, which is far more manageable thanks to my double Intimidate. For the final week, I knew for a fact I would get counter-teamed with the Charizard Y I was expecting earlier, so thanks to my teammate, Mr. William Hall, sorry I don't know how to pronounce your tag, I was given the paste to Brandon Zhang's Worlds team. After grinding matchups with some friends, I felt confident enough with it, and finally my gut prediction would come true as my opponent would bring Jackson Finch's NEIC team featuring his Charizard Y and Braviary, an obvious attempt at a counter team. I was very happy I was able to play that format again. I love using Metagross Lele, and just playing that format in general is always a fun time for me. Maybe because it was a past format, I never felt too stressed when playing my matches here, and was a good break from everything else I had going on with VGC. Outside of my own performance, I had a great time being a part of the team and talking in there outside of prep. There was a good energy in there, and it would have been nice to keep playing together had we made playoffs. In a funny but tragic sort of way, it is a shame we tied every week following a week 1 loss, which became a running joke in our group, but was ultimately the reason we just barely missed out on cut. I know at the time of writing this, Smogon is planning to host another team tour, which if it weren't for my burnout with the game, I would be glad to compete in again, as those ran very well and the ability to play older formats made it all that more appealing. There is a lot I can go into about PGL, especially regarding its creation following the end of the TPL server, as I was part of the behind the scenes. I won't, as really, that doesn't need to be shared, and I have enough to say just with what I have written down here. Plus, the point of this video is about my own personal experiences across all this, not going to dilute that by going over all the politics which took place. I'll start where I was at before the season started. I don't think I've said this publicly, but I considered the idea of dropping out of being a manager due to my growing disinterest towards the game. As much as I enjoyed being a manager the previous season, I just wasn't feeling as motivated. Following a negative experience from streaming one day, I realized this game was now causing me more stress than it was worth. This was in May, just a month before the season would begin, and for sure I did not want to give Willie a headache in trying to find a new captain. Also to consider, I had just gotten my friend Chase on board to be my new co-captain. It felt very wrong to follow that up by saying I wouldn't be managing anymore. Knowing I would have to stick through with this, I made sure I would at least give it my best once again as team manager, and to try and do as much as I could in the competitive scene within the limited time between then and when PGO ended. This included competing in Wacko World Tour and SPL, which would both finish before PGO would be over, and grinding out the rest of the Rose Tower season to earn my championships invite. Winning a major was another goal I was aiming for at this time, which, as I said, I was able to do, and thus left satisfied with less motivation to do tournaments on a regular basis. Wacko World Tour was lesser stakes, so I didn't feel too pressured playing in that, and the appeal of playing an older format in SPL over the current format made it an easier pill to swallow. I told myself with PGL done, I would finally take a break from this game I was getting little enjoyment from. Even with this positive attitude, the state of the team in many ways reflected my own fatigue. Unlike last time where we were clear frontrunners, we struggled all throughout the season and lost 6 of the 9 weeks. We may have had the only 7-0 in this second season of PGL, but that would be something we wouldn't come close to recreating again. For season 1, both myself and Chase were key players to the Bold success, but with me burnt out and Chase struggling to find strong footing in the format, it was the last thing we needed when the rest of the team wasn't winning consistently. Unless your name was Bishy. I do want to say, I was happy with the group of players I drafted. It was going to be impossible to recreate the magic of the first season, but I think I did a good job of keeping that positive atmosphere and friendly banter from last time. That isn't to say I didn't make some mistakes, the big one being the initially low number of players I drafted. This might have worked out, but the players who had to be winning every week just weren't, leading to a heavy restructuring of the team heading into mid-season. If we had something closer to our post-mid-season draft from day one, things could have been different. Alas, all I can do now is learn and move on. Surprisingly, even with a 3-5 record going into the final week, we had a chance of playoffs, which is where I transition into talking about my own record and how this all came to conclude. I went 2-2, and I will go over every match here, as for once I think they are all worth talking about. Week 1 versus Cortex was a Game 7 on the day I won the Rose Tower Clash. The good feelings which came from winning that tournament for sure took off some of the nerves I otherwise would have had. I went in with the team I had just made public, and what I was met with was what I thought was a counter team, although I would see Cortex use that same team in other matches, so maybe it wasn't. Regardless of what his prep against me was, I had to deal with what I would consider a poor matchup. I know I could have played better to win the match, but in the moment of playing that out, I just stuck with a predictable game plan, and I failed to give our team a crucial win to start us out. This is another match where I don't want to blame the loss on something outside of my control, as I know I had ways to pull through with a win. The second week was again a Game 7, and in my twisted logic of not wanting to deal with another week deciding match, I would punish my team by forcing them to watch our week's fate be decided by pure luck. If you're keeping track, this match happens the day after I choked the next Rose Tower, so this is me at peak, fuck Pokemon, I don't want to do this. At the same time, behind the scenes, sentiment was growing more negative among us involved in the league, so to try and brighten the mood, I took up Azulite's offer on making this a silly metronome match. I walked into this knowing full well it could horribly backfire and give us a second loss, but with everything going on, to me it was the right choice. If you were someone with no stakes in this, I think it's quite the humorous showcase of how lopsided luck can go in metronome battles. But of course, not everyone took so kindly to our game, and in a way, this is the match which broke PGL. A stricter rule of having to play the proper format was put in place, and the Ludicolo saw a massive restructuring with both captains replaced and Mr. Mike himself traded over to the Murkrows, aiding in their dominance as they would ultimately finish second in the league. My third match wouldn't come until 4 weeks later, as I would purposely bench myself following my stunt. This was the infamous week we 7-0'd the Powder Snows following the midseason draft. My match versus Pengy wasn't anything too special besides the fact I ended up facing my former EGO manager, which is kind of funny. Groudon would, for a second time in a TPL/PGL match, force me into a Game 3 because it missed the Precipice Blades where otherwise I would have won 2-0. Thanks, Groudon. So for this last match, I think it would just be easier for me to talk about if I skipped to the final week of regular season and worked backwards. Heading into week 9, we were 3-5 and about to face the second best team at the time in the Phantasms. Despite our poor record, we still had a shot at playoffs. We beat the Phantasms and we make it in. This condition was made easier since the other two teams in contention, the Gamers and the Condors, were up against each other. Since the Phantasms wouldn't even be playing their starting players, that was already some pressure off our shoulders. Despite that, after 6 matches played, we were 3-3 with a Game 7 deciding our fate. Meanwhile, the Condors had easily beaten the Gamers 4-1. Our Game 7 would end up being pushed back a day later, which in that time, the Gamers were able to win their last 2 matches, bringing the score to a 4-3. Here is where I have to explain this little thing called tiebreakers. With only our last match left, this was the scenario we were in. We win, and we make playoffs, as despite being tied for matches won, we had more individual games won already, so we would win off that tiebreaker. But if we lose, we miss out by an incredibly thin margin of just 1 match. Had the Gamers lost 1 more of their matches, or if we had won 1 more of our matches at any point before this, due to us being ahead in individual games, this Game 7 wouldn't have mattered, and we could have lost this week too and still make it in. But of course, that would not happen, and we lost this final game. This is where my match versus Swilley 2 weeks prior comes in, and why I was so mad at myself for what happened. To not go too much into it, I would end up requesting an activity win, but once he responded, I ended up not arguing for it further, and instead played out the match. Why did I do this? I was annoyed at people doubting me and wanted to prove my worth. To walk away with a free win did not sit well with me, and chose to stick to my original plan of playing a serious match. I would get too owed. I can say it was a bad matchup, or by then I just wasn't in the best headspace to play, but what happened is I lost. Losing this match on its own did not really end up bothering me, as we had lost a week by then, and making playoffs was what ultimately mattered, which we made it in as long as we won either of the remaining 2 weeks. Personally, even missing out on playoffs wasn't the worst, as at least there would have been 1 less commitment to the game. But still, for the sake of the team, I did not want my lack of motivation to get in the way of our hard work in there. I don't really care that I lost, I don't care we didn't make playoffs, and I wouldn't have cared much if I had argued further for the activity win, but not have gotten it. Sure, it would have been nice to have it and make playoffs because of it, but that's not truly why I was so mad at myself. Ultimately, this all comes down to the reason why I didn't take that win. Me being insecure. Now, this is a personal thing which goes beyond VGC, which I won't go into much here. All I'll say is something really struck a chord with me going into the match, and I hated myself for me worrying so much about it. I hated the fact that the scenario which played out at the final hour of playoff standings being decided could have been prevented if it weren't for my own insecurity. I truly felt I had let down my team. I left the PGO server right after that final match concluded, and I don't know what was said following my exit, but I just want to make it clear I wasn't mad at anyone else at any point during all this except myself. Not at the Gamers or Swilley, this was just me conflicted with my own emotions and for my worst fear at the time playing out right in front of me. I want to close this out by saying I truly did enjoy being a Bolts manager this second round. Maybe the stress which came along with it was a bit much, but being a manager had been highlights of my VGC career, and I'm thankful to being given the opportunity. If a PGO 3 happens, which as of writing this I really doubt will happen, but if it does, and I'm not too busy or tired, I would love to manage once again. Because I know I'm not the only one who would love to be cheering Baumel's Bolts in finals for PGL. That would have been the end if it weren't for me deciding to sign up for one last thing as I'm ready to head out the door. It'll be announced Victory Road would take over the World Cup tournament after past iterations had been ran by the now defunct Trainer Tower. My initial reaction was to not sign up, as at the time I was busy with Wacko World Tour, PGL, and SPL. Sometime before this, like maybe a month or two before, the Desafio Latam people were running their own version of World Cup, but for Latin American countries only. I would express interest in joining El Salvador's team, but it would come after tryouts had begun, so nothing happened there. Fast forward to late June, and I get a DM from Giovanni Polanco, who, if you don't recognize, you probably recognize his team. He sent me a link to join tryouts for Team El Salvador, this time for World Cup, to which I would happily accept, albeit with a hint of doubtfulness of whether this was a good idea. Following the Rose Tower incident, I know I'm bringing it up again, but it truly was a major moment for me. I would reevaluate my decision to participate in this and would choose to drop out of competing. I cited fatigue with the game and would wish them the best. Either later that week or the next, I would get a DM from another member of Team El Salvador, again asking me to join the team. Waka World Tour would have been over by the time World Cup started, and since chances seemed slim for my SPL team to make playoffs, I would have only had PGO and World Cup to worry about. After thinking about it for a day, I would end up saying yes, just not with the excitement I would have liked. With that, I was now on board for World Cup. One last ride before I stepped away. During this time, as it followed that last match from PGL, I would stop playing the format outside of prep with my teammates. I would do my homework, scouting out my opponents to where I felt confident in what I would bring that week versus them. But this was mostly done last minute with whatever squad I would throw together. And when I mean last minute, I mean for my 5th match, my opponent had sent me the battle code while I was still genning my team. I would finish with a 5-1 record, with us going on to make the playoff stage, but losing the first round to none other than the US. 2 of the matches here you can go watch over at Victor Road's channel, those being me versus Kunal and North. Me versus Bank Zeno was also supposed to go up, but I messed up the recording to where I had EDM blasting over the bod. After feeling demotivated a week prior versus Team Canada, finding out I would play on stream with a rematch versus Kunal no less lit a fire under me to give a good match this time around. Going into it, I expected Zacian and for him to prep for Groudon, as due to my loss the week prior, there was a chance I would default back to Comfort. Expecting the possibility of something like Rain Dance Aleki plus Urshifu, I would give Amoonguss Rocky Helmet, which turned out to be the biggest player in this match alongside the Scarf Entei. Looking back on the bod, I was correct as his Tornadus did indeed carry Rain Dance. As for my match versus North, we were the final game of the week. We had lost by then, so to please the people and live up to my name, I told him a day prior to our match, I'm bringing Zekrom, don't bring anything serious please. I've shared a rental code to this which did some decent numbers, and I even did a video on a separate channel playing with the team. Since I imagine some people would be interested in the thought process behind it, I'll give a mini team report here. This team was purely built in the context for this match. Knowing something like Kyogre wouldn't come out, I would forego that matchup in favor of others. Things like Duskmane Necrozma, Solgaleo, Eternatus, maybe even Cali Ice was what I expected, so I tailored the team in the possibility I faced those restricteds. I do think AV Rillaboom over Volcarona does improve the team a whole lot, so if for whatever reason you want to use this crappy team, change that and give Instant Citrus. AV Rilla helps versus both Kyogre and Cali Shadow, where Volcarona is there as more Zacian hate, which isn't needed too much on here with the Bronzong, Landorus, and Ensign. As for being a member on the team, I again took a bit more of a backseat role due to my declining interest in playing the game. I know Gio was very happy with the help I did put in, but I know I could have done more if I was really feeling up to it. Something funny is I would start writing out in Spanish in the group chat, but I grew tired of double checking if I was spelling things right and seeing where the accents went, so by the end I was just mostly writing in English. For the record, I have no issue understanding or speaking Spanish, I just suck writing at it due to those fucking accents. I can never get those right. Oh, and having WhatsApp as our group kinda sucked. I'm so spoiled to having individual Discord channels for every match in a week. Having everything dumped into one continuous chat just doesn't cut it for me. Sadly, I think that's all I have to say about my World Cup experience. I'm glad I was able to end all this on a high note, but man, by the end, I was ready to step away, which brings me to the end of the video. I would succumb to a major case of burnout from playing VGC. In all of my years of playing, I would regularly take breaks and was never as involved as I would end up being during this period. I'll always remember this conversation I had with my friend Alex the day of the first RVGC circuit finale, where I said I was looking into taking a break after having such a busy Series 6. This would not happen as I grew to quickly love Series 7, and of course I would get sucked into managing the bolts, where coincidentally I would have Alex on board as my co-captain. From then on, late November 2020 to mid-September 2021, every week was either a tournament to compete in or a match to prep for. And if I didn't have any matches that week, it was prep to do with my teammates. At first this was no issue, but it would begin to grow tiring right around as I got involved with EGL. This is to add to what would become my increasing frustration in playing the game. As much as I did have my moments playing Series 8 and 9, at points it would feel more like a chore than having fun. If there's anything to learn from what I've said today, if you don't like playing the game, just stop. So many times I see people complaining about the format, VGC, whatever, and like, just don't play. It's not your job, go do something else. Play another game, go work on some other hobbies. Why keep putting up with bullshit if you don't have to? I love VGC, I love to compete, and being a part of this community means so much to me. It's why I've stuck with it for so long. But I reached a point I was no longer getting that enjoyment I once did. Moving forward, with what was said recently as of re-recording this about live events returning, my original plan of taking time off until tournaments returned stays as is. With me being scheduled to manage in January anyway, I guess this all lined up perfectly to where I can at least have the rest of 2021 off. To close this out, I want to thank all the new people I've met, all the new friends I've made, and all my teammates across all this. And most of all, anyone who watched the entirety of this video. Just thinking what the hell I'm going to have as background footage as I've been writing this script hurts my head. So thanks for watching all the way. Final word, Pokemon is a wonderful thing. It has brought me so much joy, and I'm sure it has to you as well. And with how shitty everything is, don't let anything ruin one of the few good things we have.